we're beginning from about like 1 to about 15 lines from the top. Toshma on Daf Nun Amid Beis. Let us review. Very interesting. Look at this picture. You have a carbon, tumura, a carbon. Let's say the white is a carbon, and if somebody would say this should be tumura on this, the black should be tumura on the white, that means that he's saying that it should take the place. The Torah says both of them become kedusha. They both of them have a holiness to it, and the kedusha does not go off the carbon, but actually both of them have a kedusha to it. That's called tumura. Now, tumura, the Gemara says, applies only by a carbon yachid, not a carbon sibor. That's a very important point. If this was, let's say, a carbon tamid, for example, a carbon sibor, tumura would not make this. If you just say harezu tumura, this would not become kadosh. It would not be holy. It only applies by a carbon yachid. So that's step 2. The question that the Gemara is dealing with, and that's why in Brisk they always studied kachim, because there's a lot of lumdis in kachim, and we're just discovering that right now. The Gemara says, what would you think about by the par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur? The power on the Kohen Gadol of Yom Kippur, there's an opinion that holds that's a carbon yachid. It has a carbon yachid because the Kohen paid for it. And if the Kohen Gadol would die, you can't use it anymore, because a chatas that belonged to a single person, and he died before, being makravit, doing the blood, it's a waste. It's a waste. You have to kill the carbon or whatever. So you have to redo the carbon if another Kohen would take a place. But this par of the Kohen Gadol, there's another unique. It's like a hybrid. The hybrid is that that other kahanim are becoming forgiven. They're getting atonement from it. So perhaps with Tumura, when you look at Tumura, you don't look to the halachas of Tumura apply to the person that's getting the kapara, not so much the person that made it hegdish. So let's use a side example. If I made something hegdish on behalf of somebody else, I can't make it Tumura, but that other person can make this Tumura. Because if I designated a carbon chatas for somebody, I paid for it, I decided I'm paying for it, only that person can make the Tumura. Then Tumura would effectuate. So over here, since by the power of the Kohen Gadol, the Gemara wants to say that since, and this is important, since the Kohen Gadol carbon is on behalf of all Kahanim, so that should be looked at as a tzibor carbon. So Tumura would not apply. But then again, the Gemara says, here is how we split an atom. Although the Kohen Gadol paid for the carbon, and although other Kahanim are getting kapara, but they're not considered partners of the carbon, it works like this, that the Kohen Gadol gets a kapara, and imagine him floating on a boat, and on top of him, the Kohen, the other Kahanim get it like they get a kapara, but they're not a part of they're floating on top of the Kohen Gadol. They don't own the boat, so to speak. They're just on top of the Kohen Gadol. That's what the Gemara says. Or perhaps they are partners in the carbon. So again, that would make the difference. If they're partners in the carbon of the power of the Kohen Gadol, they're partners because they're getting atonement. They can't do Tumura. But if it's only the Kohen Gadol that really is the owner of this carbon, and they're just getting they're coming along for the ride, then Tumura would work over here. So that's the question. Okay, very clear. Is a par belonging to a Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur subject to the laws of Tumura? Tashma coming here. This Brisa says that a regular carbon has more stringencies than a Tumura digger carbon, than something that Tumura. The Tumura is more strict than a Zevach. Choyme bezevach, because the strictness of about a Zevach, shahazevach, a regular carbon, noye b'yochid kibet tzibur, can apply. A yochid can make a carbon. A tzibur has carbonas. Now, this now the Gemara, that what the Gemara is going to learn is that they're speaking about a specific carbon. There is a specific carbon that does all three things. Doiches Shabbos, it overrides Shabbos. Vesa Tuma, it overrides Tuma. Va'oisa Tumura, and can do Tumura. So the Gemara is going to learn that this is speaking about a specific zebach, a specific carbon. We don't know what. Mashen came by Tumura. Such a thing can never happen in a Tumura carbon. A Tumura carbon that became kedushadik because someone said Harezu Tumura, these halachas would not apply. But there are strictness of a Tumura carbon that would not apply by regular carbon. There are strictness that apply by Tumura over a zebach. Shahat Tumura, a Tumura carbon, chala al balmum kavua. This means that a Tumura could even go on a balmum. For example, if you look at the picture over here, right, in this situation, if this black sheep was a balmum, by you saying this white, this should be Tumura for that, this would have a kedushas haguf. It would have a holiness to it, like a kedushas haguf. But unlike a regular zevach, would not have a kedushas haguf. It would only have kedushas damin. That means you sell it and you give the money to the Beda Kabayas, to the construction of the Beis Hamikdash. Here, it would have a kedushas haguf, and I guess you would have to buy a carbon with it. Obviously, you can't bring a balmuma as a carbon. You would sell the Tumura and bring with the money a carbon oil or something like that. And when you redeem it, the eina yoytzu lechulen ligazes v'le'aviv. You can't use the shearings and work with that animal. Once it was called a Tumura, even if you sell it and transfer the kedusha, the original Tumura has some holiness that you can't share, you can't take off the wool of the animal and can't work with it anymore. In Zevach, it's impossible to have a regular carbon take effect on an animal that has a balmum. It can't happen. That's what the Brisa says. Now, this is by every Tumura. So, again, the Brisa said that is a possible carbon that can have three qualities. It's Doicha Shabbos, it can override Tuma and do Tumura. So the Gemara says, Hi Zevach, Hey Chedami. What is a Zevach that does all three things? Do you want to say it's a carbon that belonged to one person? If it belonged to one person, Midachi Shabbos with Tuma, can you have a situation of a carbon Yachid that overrides Shabbos and Tuma? Only a carbon Tzibur generally overrides Shabbos and Tuma, not a carbon Yachid. Ella, the Brisa was referring to a type of carbon called a Tzibur. So then, okay, it fits 2 out of 3. It could be Doicha Shabbos, could override Shabbos and Tuma, but Mi Oisa Tumura. Can it do Tumura? So what was the Brisa talking about? What carbon could do all three things? Doicha Shabbos, Tuma, and do Tumura. It must be a lav, it must be that hybrid carbon. The hybrid carbon is the par of Yom Kippur. Why? Because it obviously is being brought on Yom Kippur, and if everybody was Tameh, you would still bring it. So it's Doicha Shabbos versus Tuma. The Kfiyah Leizman, because you must bring it on Yom Kippur. So, and it has a din of a Yachid that it's Oisa Tumura. It's called the Kohen Gadol's carbon that Tumura, the halachas of Tumura, applied to it. It's not really called the Kohanim's carbon. It's really called the Kohen Gadol's carbon. It's a carbon Yachid, and Tumura would apply. The carbon Yachid, so that's proof positive that a par that belonging to a Kohen Gadol, the par, even though other Kahanim are getting kaparov with it, it's a carbon Yachid, and therefore the halachos of Tumura would apply. Amar Rav Sheshes disagrees. Lloyd, that's not so. Why? It's talking about be'eloi sha'aron. There's another carbon that Aaron brings, that right, which was a regular oila. On Yom Kippur, he brought in a ram. That ram is a carbon yachid, a real carbon yachid, because nobody got a kapara with it. It was just a ram, and it was brought on Shabbos. It overrides Shabbos and Tuma because it's a Yom Kippur carbon. And says Rav Sheshes, I think I'm correct to reserve this brisa. It's talking about Eloi Shaharon, and it's not talking about the par. Why? I make more sense. If you want to say that our carbon of the brisa is talking about the cow, so then you have to learn the brisa, and the brisa says that a regular carbon can override Shabbos, can override Tumah, and you could do Tamura. But the Tamura of that carbon would not override Shabbos and Tumah. So if it's talking about the par chatos that the Kohen Gadol brought, it's mashma that when you make a Tamura on this chatos, you would be allowed to bring it. Tamura is the par, this Tamura, if the Bryce is talking about the exchange, you're making exchange of a par, Shabbos with Tumah, hu de loidachia. You're telling me that it would not override Shabbos and Tumah. Hol b'choil, makrif karva, but during the weekdays, you could bring it, right? But ha-tamura is chatasi. At the end of the day, if you did a tamura on that par, that's called a tamura of a chatas. Tamura is chatas lemisa azla. Tamura is chatas is brought to death. You see, if I do a tamura of an oila, then you say the Torah says bring both of them as carbon oilers. But a chatas is only brought because you did a sin. And if you're bringing one animal to bring atonement for your sin, the tamura of that animal, if you said tamura, should go to death. And so the brisa that says that these halachas would not apply, but you could bring it on the weekday, cannot be talking about the par, because the par, if you did tamura, you don't bring it at all. So the Gemara says, loy, that's not a proof that the brisa is talking about the ram. La'olam pare. Really, the brisa is talking about the cow. Why tamura? What does that mean, tamura? Shame tamura. The concept of tamura does not have these qualities of doicha Shabbos and Tumah, right? And tamura doesn't apply by tamura. Exactly. You can't make a tamura on another tamura. There's no third derivative here. So for Gemara says, if that's the way you're learning pshat in the brisa, then it's not specific on a tamura, but it's the concept of tamura. So why are you so specific on the zebach? Zebach nami shem zebach. Why don't you say it's talking about the concept of carbonis, not specifically talking about the par? Because your whole proof is saying that the brisa talks about the par. Who says? Maybe the brisa is talking about zebach, the word zebach, the concept of zebach. So the Gemara says shem zebach like a toni. The word, the concept of zebach, it doesn't talk about. It says the word zebach. Zebach means it's talking about a specific carbon. Midik b'mai, how do you know that? Midik toni, since it says choyme batmura, tamura is more strict. Now remember, tamura is more strict than the concept of zebach. If you're learning that's the pshat, you're going to say like this: Shatmura chala al balmum kavua. That the strictness of tamura could take effect if the animal is a balmum kavua, if it has a balmum, if it's a handicapped animal. Now, you're telling me that din only applies by tamura and would not apply by any zebach. The isal kadaitach my zebach, shem zebach. If you think the Bryce is talking about the concept of zebach, but not actually a particular carbon, well, that means that you're telling me that the concept of carbon can never apply by a balmum kavua. It can never happen. You can have a carbon that has a kedushas haguf on a handicap. Ikar, let's go to nun aleph and aleph. Bechor umaisa decholim al balmum kavua. We find the carbonus of bechor, an animal that's born as a bechor, or if it's born a balmum, still kedusha would have happened to that animal. Umaiser, if an animal you take 10% of your mice of behema, each 10 behema that was born for you that year has a kedusha to it that you have to bring it as a carbon shlomim. That's called maisa behema. And let's say as you're counting it and you're leading it out the door, the 10th one that you count had a balmum to it. You call it, once you call it number 10, it has a din of a carbon to it, even though it has a balmum. You redeem it. The chalon al balmum kavua. In this situation, it would take effect on a balmum kavua, a permanent handicap. The ein yoitza l'chulin ligazal of it, and it still have the same din that it doesn't go out. You can never share with that animal. You can never work with that animal. So the brisa itself cannot be talking about the concept of carbon. It must be talking about a specific carbon. So it's talking about the specific carbon of par. It's talking about the specific carbon of a par kohen gadol. Now, when it comes to tamura, it could be talking about the concept of tamura. So the Gemara says like this: it's not talking about the concept of carbon; it's talking about a specific carbon par. And this brisa is a good proof that a par of a kohen gadol, although other kahanim are getting kapara, it's called a carbon yochid, and you could do tumura. So the Gemara says, the Gemara just finishes up the brisa. The Gemara finishes up the understanding of the brisa. Why did the brisa do something different? When it came to talking about a carbon, chomer zevach, it's talking about a specific carbon. When it comes to talking about tumura, it's talking about the concept of tumura. The answer is simple. Shem tumura achasi. But when it comes to tumura, the concept of tumura applies by all animals. By all tumuras, they're all the same. There's no differentiation. But zevach, the concept of zevach, there are karbonas. Most zvachim, most karbonas, you can never make kedusha a carbon that has a balmum on it. But there's exceptions. There's ika b'char and ika meiser. There's b'char and meiser, which could take effect on a balmum. And therefore, the brisa was not, so rules would not apply because there are exceptions. So therefore, when the brisa was discussing a carbon, it was talking about a specific carbon, the carbon of par. And when it was talking about tumura, it was talking about the concept of tumura. So let's review right here. We are holding that we had a question. The par kohen gadol on Yom Kippur, can you do tumura with it? The answer is yes, according to the way we learned pshat in this brisa, because the brisa says there's a special carbon that could do three things: doicha Shabbos, tuma, and make tumura, and that could only apply by a par of a Yom Kippur, which is Yom Kippur carbon, which is a yochid carbon. Could do all three things. It could doicha Shabbos, it could doicha tumura, it could do tuma, override tuma, and you do tumura because at the end of the day, it belongs to the kohen gadol. It's a tumura diga carbon. That was the way we wanted to bring a proof to the answer. But Rav Shesha says, no, the brisa could be talking about the ram. So it's not clear. So Gemara just cleans it up. Rav Shesha says the brisa could be talking about the ram of a haran, which always remains a carbon yachid because it didn't even bring kapara on the other kahanim. And that does the same three tricks. It could be doicha Shabbos, could doicha tuma, and could do tumura because it's still a doicha. So that's a good answer. But the Gemara says you have other answers. Like the Pesach, the doiches Shabbos. Carbon Pesach is a type of carbon yachid that overrides Shabbos. If Pesach this year came out on Shabbos, it would override Shabbos, Vesa Tuma, and overrides Tuma, Va'isum Tumura, the carbon yachidi. Because Tumura, it would do Tumura because it is a carbon yachid. So why didn't he say that the brisa was talking about carbon Pesach? That's also a good answer. The answer is Kisavar ein shoichet in Pesach al yachid. Every carbon Pesach is by definition a tzibur carbon Pesach, because this Rav Sheshes holds that one person cannot bring a carbon Pesach. You have to have 3 or 4 people part of that carbon. So therefore, a carbon Pesach is not called a carbon yachid, and therefore Tumura would not apply, because Tumura again does not apply by a carbon that's owned by more than one person. So the Gemara says v'noikle Pesach Sheni. Why don't we say that the brisa is talking about Pesach Sheni? Because Pesach Sheni can be brought by one person. If a guy didn't bring Pesach Rishon, he brings Pesach Sheni, even if he's one individual. So the Gemara says yes, it could do. It's a carbon yachid. It could probably override Shabbos, but the Gemara says midachi tuma. If it would it be doiche if the guy who's bringing the carbon is tameh, could it override it? Does it override it? Stop. So therefore, the Gemara stopped over here. Here ends the Gemara. That means it would not be doiche tuma. So you can't say it's talking about a Pesach Sheni. You can't say it's talking about a Pesach Rishon. That's why Rav Sheshes chose to say that the brisa is talking about what? The Eloi Shel Ha'ar, the ram of a har, which is a carbon yachid. It never applied to any kohen, and it has all 3 tricks: Shabbos, Tuma, and it does Tumura. But the Gemara chose that could possibly be talking about a par, the par of the kohen gadol, which will prove that the par of a kohen gadol, albeit that it brings kapara to the other kahanim, it's still called a carbon yachid, and you could do Tumura. Now the Gemara just wants to clean up shop. The Gemara said before, Gemara brought a Mishnah. And in that Mishnah, we find Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yaakov. And Rabbi Meir said that the carbon Pesach is a carbon yochid, is a private carbon. And Rabbi Yaakov said the carbon chagiga, which carbon chagiga was, let's say, everybody who visited Eretz Yisrael on the Shalosh Regalim had to bring their own carbon, right? A carbon shalmei chagiga. That's an individual. It's similar to a carbon Pesach, whereas carbon Pesach was brought Erev Pesach, a carbon chagiga was brought on Yom Tov. And yet, in the Mishnah, it calls the carbon Pesach as a private carbon and the carbon chagiga as a public carbon. Why? The Tana of the Mishnah that we learned on Daf Nun Amar Aleph, Mishnah, why did he call Pesach the carbon yachid? A carbon Pesach is a carbon yachid because every person in Klal Yisrael pays for that carbon Pesach. Why did he refer to carbon chagiga as a public carbon? Everybody paid for their own carbon chagiga. If the reason why he called carbon chagiga is because it was brought all out in public, Pesach name asa b'chinufya. Pesach also was brought, everybody came to the base of Mikdash at the same time. So what makes one a carbon tzibur? What makes Pesach a carbon yachid and chagiga a carbon tzibur? It was all brought with a whole multitudes of people coming to the base of Mikdash. The answer is Ika Pesach Sheni asa b'chinufya. Pesach Sheni is included in carbon Pesach, and Pesach Sheni was done by a few individuals who never brought Pesach Rishon, and therefore it was not done with such a tzibur coming into the base of Mikdash. That's why Pesach is called a Pesach carbon yachid. Amalei, if it was referring to Pesach Sheni, it came Yehi Doiches Shabbos Vesatuma. If Pesach Sheni, if it's referring to Pesach Sheni, it should override Shabbos and Tumah, because that was what Rav Meir said. Rav Meir was telling the Tanakama, I have a carbon yachid that's Doiches Shabbos and Tumah. And if Rav Meir was referring to Pesach Sheni, does Pesach Sheni override Shabbos and Tumah? Amalei, and Rav Meir holds yes. Pesach Sheni overrides Shabbos and Tumah. Command the Amadachi. Rav Meir holds like the person that Pesach Sheni overrides Shabbos and Tumah. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa. Pesach Sheni doiches a Shabbos ve'ine doiches a Tumah. The Tanakama holds Pesach Sheni does override Shabbos but not Tumah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer af doiches a Tumah. It can even override Tumah. So if the person is brought, and let's say the person who was Tamei by Pesach Rishon, if he's Tamei by Pesach Sheni, you can bring the Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara says, my Tamei the Tanakama. What's the reason of the Tanakama that holds Pesach Rishon, Pesach Sheni is not brought when the guy is Tamei? He will tell you, you pushed him off the Pesach Sheni because he was a Tamei person, right? That's why he couldn't bring Pesach Rishon. So the Asa Betuma, you should do Pesach Sheni Betuma. That doesn't make sense. So Pesach Sheni does not override Tumah. For Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda tell you, Amakra, the pasuk says, Kol Pukas a Pesach Yasu Oisun. You should do Pesach Sheni like every carbon Pesach. Ba'afila Betuma, just like the first one. If Gans Klal Yisrael was Tamei, if the Tzibur was Tamei, you bring Pesach Rishon. So also, if all the people that are bringing Pesach Sheni are Tamei, you bring Pesach Sheni. The Torah gave you an option to bring Pesach Sheni b'tahara. But loizaka, if it didn't work out and everybody was Tamei by Pesach Sheni, Yasenu b'tumah, you do it b'tumah. So therefore, since it was only a miyat of Klal Yisrael bringing Pesach Sheni, if every one of those people who was required to bring Pesach Sheni were Tamei, then they would bring it anyway, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, but nevertheless, it's still called a carbon yachid. And that's why Rabbi Meir called Pesach Sheni a carbon yachid, because at the end of the day, the miut of Klal Yisrael, the minority of Klal Yisrael, are bringing the carbon Pesach Sheni. Okay, that was just a side point. Let's get back to again, hang on to the Mishnah, because then we get back to Yom Kippur. Again, the question, the Gemara says that the Gemara wants to know right now a simple question. How could you ever have a Havamina? And we spoke this out. How could you ever think that the Par Kohen Gadol of Yom Kippur is a public carbon? Who's shelling out the money over here to pay for it? It has to be the Kohen Gadol. And not only that, if the Kohen Gadol took from public funds or he took from his brother's kahanim to pay for that par, it's puzzle. The Torah repeats it and says respect that it would puzzle the carbon. So how could you ever say that this carbon belongs to the people?
We talked about it yesterday, but it depends on who's getting kapara from it.
That's what the Gemara is going to say. The Gemara is going to say like this, that's what the Gemara is going to say, that it's almost like, here, if you, let's say you started a business, okay? And you started a business, and so you own the business. Now you bring your son into the business, right? So now, as soon as you bring your son into the business, and the day later, he's the partner. So that's what's going to happen over here. The Kohen Gadol paid for this whole thing. He's not allowed to take one dime from anybody. But the Chumash is going to tell you that the Torah is going to tell you that because the other Kahanim get kapara, the Torah sort of made hefker the Kohen Gadol's money, in the sense that it belongs now to other Kahanim, that they can get a kapara with it, and it becomes their carbon that really they're partners here. And therefore, they're partners. It's called a public carbon, and therefore Tamura would not apply. It's fascinating. That's why it's lumdus over here, because the Gemara said, no, maybe it's still called a personal, and they're just getting a side benefit, but it really is private. Now the Gemara is going to say that it's public. But typically, here's the proof that it's a carbon yochid. Why? The Torah says the pars ashaloi belongs to the who? To the Kohen Gadol, Amar Rachmana. Mishaloi, who maybe. He has to pay for it. The time we learned in the Brisa, Ashaloi, it says one time Ashaloi means Mishaloi, who maybe Lo Shel Tzibur. The Kohen Gadol had to pay for it. He couldn't take any public money for it. Right? Then the Gemara says, Yochol, I might have thought, Lo Yavi Mishel Tzibur. He should not take it from the public money. Shein et Tzibur Mischaper by, because the Tzibur doesn't get a kapar with it. Aval, he could collect money from Yavi B'Shel Echav Kahanim, Sheri Echav Kahanim is Chaper Boy. He should take money from his brothers, the Kahanim, because they're benefiting from this carbon. Talmud Loimet, the Torah repeats another time. Ashaloi, it has to be he paid for it. Yochel Yavi, Avada, I would think that Lechatchila, he shouldn't take money. Bimhevi, but if he took money from the other Kahanim, kosher, it would be kosher. Talmud Loimet Shuv, the Torah says a third time, Ashaloi. Shona Kosovo Allah, the Torah repeated it a numerous times, la'akev, that it stops the carbon from being kosher if the Kohen Gadol did not pay for it. So it's granted that he paid for it. So if he paid for it, it's a carbon yachid. How could you call it a public carbon? So the Gemara says, if that's the case, if it's strictly in the sense a carbon yachid, echav kahanim ilav the konim begabei heich mechapelei. The brothers kahanim, if they don't have a ownership in this carbon, how do they get atonement? Where do you have atonement without owning the carbon? Ella, what the Chumash means to say, Shani Beigazid the Aram, the treasury, the wallet of Aharon, of the Kohen Gadol, the Afkare Rachmana Gabe Echav Kahanim. It's like public, if the Torah made it hefker as it relates to the brothers of Kahanim. That means they get a free pass on this carbon, and they have ownership in the carbon. And because they have ownership in the carbon, they get a kapara. And they say same idea. So he's saying the same idea that regarding to Tmura, they own the carbon. And Shani Bei Gaza the Aharon, again, it's the wallet of Aharon, the Afkar Rachmoni Gabe Echel Kahanim, that the Torah made it public to the brothers of the Kahanim, and therefore they own it. And it's a public carbon. Tmura would not apply. But again, the Gemara didn't resolve it. It could be Tamura does apply, and they don't really own it, but they get a kapara like floating on top of the Kohen Gadol's kapara. The Kohen Gadol gets a kapara, and then like it floats, the kapara floats towards them, but they don't own the carbon. Anyway, let's go back into the Mishnah. Let's do the pictures. It's very fast. Again, here's the Kohen Gadol walking to the curtains. Okay, now the curtains over here. The Mishnah is going to deal with how does he walk. There's two curtains over here. He walked in between those two curtains, carrying the coals, and you have to make sure, you see his elbows are out over here, so he doesn't burn the curtains, because there's hot coals over here. So the Gemara says over here, the Mishnah says, he would go to the sanctuary, between he got to the two curtains, separated between the Heichal, the Kodesh, and the Kodesh Gadoshin, the Holy of Holies. Ubeneim, between the two curtains, Amma, was a space of an Amma. That's what the Tanakam holds, that there were two curtains over there. Rabbi Yossi says, there was only one curtain there, Shenema, because the pasuk says, it's a pasuk, the one curtain should divide between a Kodesh and a Kodesh Gadoshin. So there's an open pasuk that says that one curtain divided. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Yossi says one curtain, the Tanakama says two curtains. So the Gemara says, Sha'apikamale Rabbi Yossi Rabbanim. Rabbi Yossi has a great pasuk that says that there was one curtain. So how could the Rabbanim say there were two curtains? And for the Gemara Rabbanim, Amrilach, Rabbanim will tell you simple. Hanimeva Mishkan. In the Mishkan, there was one curtain. Avo b'migdash sheni, but the second base of Migdash, they built the walls al Pinavi about 80 feet high. It was a big, tall building. So therefore, since there's only an Amma, since in the first base of Migdash, there was a wall there, actually, not a curtain. There was a wall at the space of an Amma, but it wasn't so, the building itself, in the first base of Migdash, wasn't so high. So you can make a wall that's the thick of an Amma. But since the second base of Migdash, the height of the base of Migdash was 80 feet high, so you couldn't make a wall the thick of an Amma because it would be unsturdy. So instead, they used curtains. So in the Mishkan, they used one curtain. But Migdash Sheni, even though they have an Amma Traksin, there was no wall that was an Amma there, like it was in the Migdash Rishon Hu Dahabai. In the first base of Migdash, actually, there was a wall. There was only a wall that was the thick of a Amma. In the second base of Migdash, because they could not build the wall structurally, because it was too high, the building, so therefore they put curtains. And why did they put two curtains? Because that area of the space between the two curtains, the Chachamim had a suffix. Is that like part of Kodesh Kodashim, or is that part of the Heichal? They didn't know. They forgot. What is that, the Amma space between the curtains? So therefore, they made two curtains, and basically he had to go around the two curtains to get in. So if you want to see what he did, basically, this is the picture. This is the picture. The Kohen Gadol walks through the Heichal and walks in between the curtains and goes in. Okay? Now, we have a few minutes. Tanu Rabbanan. Bein Amizbeach lemenorah hoyama alech divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds the way the Kohen Gadol went with the shovel and the spoon. He went between the Mizbeach and the menorah divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So let's see that picture again. He went. You see, this is the Mizbeach. The square is the Mizbeach. He walked through the Mizbeach and the menorah and went through the two curtains. Very good. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Omer ben Shulchan leMizbeach. Some say ben Shulchan leKoisel. What does that mean? The Rameir says he went like this. Apparently, according to Rameir, there was one curtain, and he went like this on the Heichal along the side between the Shulchan and the Mizbeach, and then walked in this way. And Rabbi Yossi says he went between the Shulchan and the wall, went straight line right into the Kodesh Kodashim, right through the one curtain that separated it. So the Yesh Oimim. So the Gemara says, Man Yesh Oimim, who's the Yesh Oimim that said you went in a straight line along the wall? Amar Rav Chizda Rabbi Yossi, the Amar of our Mishnah. The Amar, he said that there was one curtain and Pischa Betzofin Kohen. You always entered in from the north. Everybody agrees to that. You entered in from the north part of it, and therefore you just walk along the north wall right into the Kodesh Kodashim. And Rabbi Yehuda, Amalacha, Rabbi Yehuda will hold. Rabbi Yehuda holds there were two curtains there. Therefore, he holds Pischa Bedarim. The opening was in the south. Again, because Rabbi Yehuda held that there were two curtains there. You have to enter into the north, but because there were two curtains over there, you entered first into the south and then walked to the north, and then you entered into the Kodesh Kodashim in the north. So now the Gemara is leading up to this question. Rameir, Kaman Svirle. Who did Rameir hold like? Rameir was this third opinion. Rameir held, look what Rameir did. Rameir did right over here on the right side of this picture. Rameir said you went to the Heichal, but you didn't go along the wall. You went between the Heichal and the Shulchan. The Gemara's question is, if he held that the opening is over here, straight in, so why didn't he go like Rabbi Yossi and just walk along the north wall and get straight into the Kodesh Kodashim? And if he held that the opening was on the south side, then do it like Rabbi Yehuda did, go to the south side. That's the Gemara's question. Rameir command severely. Who did Rameir hold like? Rabbi Yehuda severely. If he hold like Rabbi Yehuda, that the opening was on the south side, nail Rabbi Yehuda, then he should walk in the direction like Rabbi Yehuda held. Rabbi Yossi severely. But if Rabbi Yehuda, Rameir held like Rabbi Yossi, that the opening was in the north side, then walk straight down nail Rabbi Yossi. Walk straight down like Rabbi Yossi, straight down the side walls like Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara is going to answer, according to Rameir, there was a blockage there. Let me just show you what the blockage would be. Let's go. Okay, I just showed you that picture. According to Rabbi Meir, this is what the Gemara is going to answer. The reason why this is not so known because people, I never learned so much Tanakh. You only learn Tanakh from the Gemara. But in Tanakh, it says that when Shlomo built the Beis Hamikdash, there was not just one table or one shulchan. He built 10. And because he built 10, right, 10 of them, 5 extra on each side, so therefore, he could not walk along the north wall, as you can see in the picture. So that's why Rameir said, since the tables was spread this way, you cannot walk along the north wall. That's why you had to walk around it to get to the north side. And according to another opinion, the walls look like this. It went in a straight line. And nevertheless, Rameir did not want you to walk along the wall. We'll see why in the Gemara. So let's see. The Gemara says, "La'olam Rabbi Yossi ki Rabbi Yossi svilei." I will tell you, Rameir holds like Rabbi Yossi that the opening was on the north side. V'amar lecha, and he will tell you, shulchanos, the extra tables that Shlomo HaMelech built, Safin v'Dar Menachem, was placed in a block. It blocked off the whole side wall. Umafsek le shulchan, it interrupted his walk over there. V'loy misayalei, and he could not walk there. So maybe in this picture you can see it as well. If you put the shulchan, if you put the shulchans this way, as you can see over here in this picture, right? I'm just showing you aerial view. If you put the shulchans this way, oh, sorry. No, it's not. Let's go. My playing game. Okay, if you put it in this way, you're blocking his path. So that's why he held that he had to walk around it to go to the north entrance. That's what he says. He could not go that way. He had to go around it. If you want, I can tell you. And this is the final teretz. I will tell you, it was placed east and west, and really there was a path for the Kohen Gadol to walk straight into the Kodesh Kodashim. We go to Daf Nun Aleph, Nun Beis Amud Aleph, Lamei Lehedya. It was not appropriate for the Kohen Gadol to walk straight in because there was a crack. The curtain wasn't flush with the wall. Actually, you could see into the Kodesh Kodashim right on the side. You see, when he walked this way, if he walked along this wall, he could, through the crack over here, he could see into the Kodesh Kodashim. So we didn't want him to go view into the Kodesh Kodashim that way. So we had him walk around the Shulchan and then come this way in because it's not appropriate. So the Gemara is going to say, then why did Rabbi Yossi say it's appropriate for him to steer into the Kodesh Kodashim for no reason, walking this way? That's the Gemara's question. Rabbi Yossi will say, the Jews are very special that they don't need a shliach. In other words, every Jew can daven on his own, and the Kohen Gadol represents very special people. So it's not a problem that if the Kohen Gadol was like so proud of himself that he could walk straight into the Kodesh Kodashim, even peeking into the Kodesh Kodashim long before he gets there. That's what Rabbi Yossi holds. That's why Rabbi Yossi says you go along the side, even if you look into the Kodesh Kodashim through the crack, that's not a problem. The Kohen Gadol should feel very good about himself and that he's representing the Jewish people who can really don't even need him. They're so special they can daven to Hashem anytime. Now, one last question, and this will end. Rabbi Yehuda, remember, what did Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was? Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was this way, that there were two walls, and you walked in this way. You walked in through the Heichal, straight past the menorah, you passed the menorah, and then you went to the south. So the Gemara's question is, why didn't the Rabbi Yehuda say you just walk straight along the side of the menorah? Why did he have to walk in between the Mizbeach and the menorah? That's the Gemara's question. You can answer. The answer is because it's dirty over here. he may rub his clothing against the wall, and the smoke that's on the wall will dirty his garments. That's why. That's the Gemara's answer. Rabbi Yehuda Amalach, the Gemara says, nail ben menorah l'koisel. Why did he walk between the menorah and the koisel? Why did he walk between the mizbeach and the menorah? The answer is mishchare moneh. His clothing will blacken, and that's why he chose that path of walking between the mizbeach and the menorah. So again, we had a nice mishnah over here that discussed the path of the Kohen, 3 opinions, and we saw the Indian of par of the Kohen Gadol regarding Tamura. That's it.
Yeshikach.
Yeah.
Yeshikach.
Okay. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Covered a lot today, but it was good. Okay.
Very nice.